Some of the questions we get that repeat again and again and again are folks that have had a bad business situation. Here's someone in a partnership situation. I had a partner who stole money from the company, didn't pay the IRS payroll taxes. Until he moved out of town, I had no idea what was going on. You know, and we've even had this question where a spouse disappeared and left mom or dad holding the bag. Until he moved, I had no idea. Now he's in another state. I'm left holding the bag. Am I liable for the payroll taxes that didn't get paid even though I didn't know what was going on? The problem is my name is on the bank account and he was signing my name on checks. Here's someone who was a victim of fraud, and it looks like they're going to be liable for taxes too.
Yes, this is an excellent question. In order for this taxpayer to even be legally responsible for the unpaid payroll taxes, unpaid corporate payroll taxes, the IRS has to prove a two-part test. The first part is that this taxpayer must have had the authority to determine which creditors got paid, and being on the bank signature card and being an officer of the corporation implies that authority. The second part of the test is that the taxpayer must have knowledge of the liability as they're accruing. In this case, the taxpayer says he didn't have knowledge of the liability as they're accruing, and therefore this taxpayer should not be responsible for any portion of the payroll taxes that weren't paid by the corporation. I had a very, very unusual case where I was involved with two owners of a corporation. One of the owners was related to organized crime, basically stole the payroll tax deposits, the federal tax deposits, and left town with them. The IRS came in, and this was a very large company with hundreds and hundreds of employees. The IRS came in and asserted the trust fund portion or personal responsibility for the unpaid trust fund portion to the remaining owner of the corporation. Now, the remaining owner of the corporation was petrified of his partner. He had no idea this guy had a duplicitous life. He had a kind of a double life, and he was very afraid of asserting that liability against his partner who had fled, basically. My attitude with the IRS was, look, you know, this is the responsible party. The guy who's related to organized crime is the responsible party. He should be responsible for the trust fund taxes. My client should not be. So the IRS went out to investigate these facts, and they found this person, unbelievably so, and then this person came back and started arguing that he wasn't a responsible party, and we had a very interesting dialogue with the IRS and a very interesting fight with a former partner who was considered extremely dangerous. Ultimately, the IRS found our client wasn't responsible, and then the responsible party, who was related to organized crime, fled again out of the country, and so that ended the problem. But that was the first and last time I've ever seen such a large payroll tax case that involved millions and millions of dollars of liability, where an embezzler who was related to organized crime actually came back to defend himself and did a pretty good job. However, his defense wasn't valid, wasn't legal, he wasn't telling the truth. Our client was, and our client ended up not being a responsible party for the unpaid payroll taxes. But it was very unusual. And that just kind of shows you how effective the IRS investigative abilities are. They really found this guy who was buried way deep and was trying not to be found.
I kind of like that approach. Hey, this guy's already a crook. Go get him. Don't bother me. And you know, we probably should point out that Sam Landis is a partner in a major tax law firm, has practiced tax law forever. He's older than he looks, quite frankly. So he has some amazing cases that all end up going back to whatever your tax problem with the IRS, deal with it. Deal with it head on. If you try to ignore it, it gets worse. If you try to run from it, they'll find you, and it's going to get worse. And in the case of the payroll tax deal, you have to handle that just right, because you will be easy for me to say, you will be personally liable for a certain portion of that. And as we say, Sam talks real good tax lawyerese and kind of go over that payroll tax thing.
Yeah, well, payroll taxes, as far as I'm concerned, generally, other than a criminal investigation, are really the highest risk type of cases. Because the larger the company and the more employees it has, the larger the payroll tax can balloon up, and that can increase the personal exposure for the people who are running and operating the corporation. I've actually seen payroll tax cases where nobody was asserted the trust fund portion. In essence, this company, I was involved with a company that accrued a substantial amount of unpaid payroll taxes, and we handled a good chunk of that case, and the IRS made a determination that no one was responsible, which I thought was a very unusual and very fortuitous result. But there's all kinds of quirky things that can happen with payroll taxes. It can be a very technical portion of the Internal Revenue Manual and the Internal Revenue Code. There's a lot of case law on it, both in tax court and federal district court. So when it comes to payroll taxes, taxpayers really need to be very careful. They don't want to step on any landmines. Obviously, they don't want to have their lives threatened by partners. But these cases can become very contentious because the parties involved in the corporations oftentimes fight amongst each other as who's the responsible party. And in a lot of these cases, there's more than one responsible party. And when there is more than one responsible party, the IRS can assert the trust fund portion of the tax against all the responsible parties, and then it's between the parties. It's between the parties to determine, how that's going to get paid. If the IRS collects all of it from one responsible party, that responsible party can sue the other responsible parties for indemnification and get compensation back from his other business associate.